Welcome to our latest Wandering Walks of Wonder tour. Today we're headed to Independence, Kansas. Independence was settled on land that was purchased from the Osage Indians in September of 1869 by George A. Brown for the whopping price of $50. The Osage, unfortunately, were forced to move to Indian Territory, which is now present-day Oklahoma, to make way for white settlement. Brown originally called the town site Colfax after Schuyler Colfax, who was vice president under President Ulysses S. Grant. As we go along our tour here in Independence, we'll learn a little bit more about some of the buildings, the people, and events that have happened in town, including this building here, which is the E.K. Bowles Building. This building was constructed in 1925 and originally used as an auto agency. It was identified at the time as the E.K. Bowles Building. At that time, the building also housed a deluxe cleaner, as well as in 1929 a Texaco oil and gas dealership. The building right next door is the old Home Telephone Company and Old Southwestern Bell Building. The Home Telephone Building was erected in 1907 and was used as a telephone company. An early telephone franchise in Independence was held by Hickman and Perkins, then in 1901 by the Penwell brothers. About 1904, the gas and oil boom greatly increased the demand for local and long-distance service in the city. The local franchise was sold to the Montgomery County Home Telephone Company, and the company constructed the building that we saw about 1907. In 1869, a group of Oswego, Kansas men led by R.W. Wright settled in the area of Independence and decided to make Independence the county seat. E.E. Wilson and F.D. Irwin opened the first store in October of 1869, naming it Wilson and Irwin Groceries, and Independence was designated finally the county seat in 1870. The next historic building we see here on our left is the old Kansas Gas and Electric Office Building. This is a two-story commercial building that was constructed sometime between 1921 and 1922. The Kansas Gas and Electric Company occupied the building until 1939. This two-story commercial building that we see here on our left was constructed around 1902 and was used as a book and stationery store. In 1905, it was a tea and coffee shop, and a one-story rear addition was added at that time. The first floor was vacant until about 1908, but there were 3 tenants on the second floor, including the Oaks Print Shop, which was listed there until 1922. In 1911, the Joy Theater occupied the first floor, and from 1916 until 1956, the Merchants Transfer and Storage Company also occupied the building. This building on our left is known as the Tribune Building. This building was constructed around 1885, and it housed originally a grocery store on the first floor. The Tribune and Reporter offices, which were a local newspaper at the time, were on the second floor, and a lodge room for a fraternal organization was on the third floor. In 1899, the Tribune building moved, and we'll see that a little bit later on. As we walk across the main intersection of Main and Pennsylvania and start walking up Pennsylvania, this large building we see on our right was once the Baden Clothing Company. When this building was completed in 1919, the Baden Clothing Company had what was called, quote, the finest display windows in the city. At the time, the property was also considered to be one of the finest stores in this part of Kansas. Here's an interesting fact about independence. On April 17th, 1930, the city was the very first in the nation to use a permanent lighting system for an exhibition baseball game. It was held between the Independence producers and the House of David semi-professional team of Benton Harbor, Michigan. Independence team won with a score of 9-1 before a crowd of about 1,700 spectators. The Central Hardware building that we see here on our left originally opened as a two-story masonry building as both a tailor shop and a clothing store in the 1890s. But by 1902, the Central Hardware Company had occupied this property. There was also a tin shop in the rear as well as office space on the second floor around 1908. Eldridge and Chandler were the proprietors of the building, and in 1922, Burt Woodman also added his businesses to the building. Here's a little known story about independence that you may find interesting, but Miss Able, A-B-L-E, who was a rhesus monkey, was born at the Ralph Mitchell Zoo here in Independence. It's a zoo, a very small zoo, but it's still a zoo that's still open today. But Miss Able, along with Miss Baker, who was a squirrel monkey, became the first monkeys that the United States used in its space program to fly into space. They went into space and returned alive on May 28, 1959. Across the street from us, the large buff-colored building that we see was once the Kansas Commercial National Bank. When the Commercial National Bank was occupied in June of 1921, practically every room in the new six-story office building was rented. The bank had operations on the first floor, and there was a small jewelry store that occupied the northeast corner, as well as a pharmacy on the southwest corner. There were 75 office suites at the building at the time that the building opened. Commercial National Bank was established in 1884. On October 6, 1903, the Tribune announced that Mr. Stitch would erect a fine store building between City Hall and Wade's Grocery to be operated by the Wright brothers as a dry goods store. Not the Wright brothers who invented the plane, though. Later, the store was listed as the D.G. Whitney Company, Sanders Ridgeway Clothing, and the Townsend Department Store. Next door was what was once the old fire station. This building was used as a city fire station from as early as 1890. From 1902 until 1915, city offices were located on the second floor, and there was also a jail in the rear of the building. After a new municipal building was constructed for the city, the property was listed as a billiard parlor and lunchroom. As we continue along Pennsylvania, we come across the Ulmer Furniture Company building. Around 1902, this building was a one-story double-front masonry building constructed here. It was listed as a furniture store, part of Ulmer Furniture. It became Ulmer Furniture until 1922. S.H. Ulmer established the business way back in 1870. Although he had died by 1900, the company continued under the management of Arthur DeVore. The company carried an extensive trade in Kansas, Indian Territory, as well as Oklahoma, and it published an annual illustrated catalog. Next door is the Burns Bakery building. This was a two-story building that was constructed around 1885. It was used as a grocery store as well as a crockery store. Other uses included a buggy store around 1902 and the Star Bakery in 1911. From 1918 until 1939, the property was used by J.M. Burns Bakery. This building that we see here on the corner, the kind of green color building, was one of the first businesses to erect a big brick building here on Pennsylvania Avenue in the 1880s. The earliest drugstore building, this was part of the J.H. Pugh Drug Company, was a one-story wood frame building with the false front. As we walk across the street, we come across the John Jakowski building. This building was constructed in 1910 and was originally used as a furniture store. It was owned by J.L. Jakowski and was used for a business college later on. The building was nearly completed by October 26, 1910. On January 18, 1911, John Jakowski opened his new store offering everything for the household. The Montgomery Ward Company leased the building in 1927 and occupied the building for more than 30 years. Sears now is one of the retail outlets that still use this historic building. This building was constructed in 1909 for the Independence Reporter newspaper owned by H.G. James. By 1920, the property was owned by the Jackson Undertaking Company. C.S. Fowler was president and Charles M. Jackson was vice president. They remained in business at this location until 1939. The old Eagles Lodge building dates back to 1912, and we can see that with a date in brick above the side entrance to the building. It was first listed in the city directory in 1913 as Eagles Lodge number 412. It was later used then as part of other businesses, including the Campbell Candy Company and J.R. Heiberger Furniture. The building that we see here on our right is the Burton Shaw building. The Burton Shaw building, which was originally the Wells Fargo Express building, was a very large building that was constructed around 1925. At the time, John Burton Shaw was a prominent attorney in Independence. The building once housed the Willis Brothers Cafe, Samuel McDaniel's Grocery, as well as Sayers Hardware in the 1930s. The Osage building that we see here on our right was constructed between 1905 and 1910. This building either replaced or incorporated two stone masonry buildings that stood on the property that had been here since the 1890s. Starkweather and Albert operated a wallpaper and paint store for many years, and from 1926 to 1922, the property was used as a bookstore. In the late 1920s to 1939, the building housed a shoe and ladies' wear store. In 1910, Thomas J. Booth announced that he was going to build two buildings that faced Myrtle Street and one next to them on 8th Street. The building that we see here today was completed in 1911 and became the Booth Theater. The building had a two-story, five-bay facade as well as recessed entrances that operated as a very picturesque movie theater in its day. A third story was eventually added, as well as new terracotta and stalled tile. About 1,100 people would enter the building for premiere performances, silent movies, talking pictures, and much more. In fact, the first talking picture was shown in 1929 here in Independence for the residents of town. Across the street, across 8th Street, is the old Federal and Post Office building. This building was constructed during about 1912, I guess it was. It operated as not only a post office, but as a federal building. It has since been acquired by the Ladies' Library and Art Association and is used as the Independence Museum. The Cook's Hotel is a nationally registered historic building. It opened in 1910. In 1910, it opened as the Cook's Quick Lunch Building, and by 1912, it was listed as Cook's European Hotel. From 1913 to 1918, Wills and Son, who were confectioners, occupied the first floor of the building while the hotel stayed above. Charles H. and J. Clarence Willis were the principal partners, and Leo and Marion Wills worked as clerks in the building. In 1922, W. and O.P. Butler operated a cafe and rooming house in the building. And then the cafe was replaced by C.Z. Zimmerman's billiard parlor in 1929, but the upper floors were still used as a hotel until well after 1939. The Veeder properties, or Veeder building that we see here, was once two properties that were combined with a very distinctive and streamlined terracotta facade that occurred around 1940. The building housed the Kansas Gas and Electric offices on the first floor and offices on the second floor. Kirk Veeder was an attorney for whom the remodeled building was renamed, occupied one of the offices in the building. It was a dry goods store in the late early 1900s, and then from 1910 to 1939, it was a motion picture theater. This beautiful building that we see here on the corner was once First National Bank building. New construction was reported in 1833 on this building, right at the corner of Pennsylvania and Maine. Its use was as the First National Bank building, and W.E. Otis was the president at the time. There were, one time, baths in the rear of the building, as well as a barber shop in the basement. In 1917, First National Bank merged with Citizens National Bank, and the building stood vacant until 1922, when Fidelity State Bank occupied the building in 1929. In the 1930s, it was an ice cream shop as well as an insurance agency. Ahead of us is the old Booth Hotel building. It's also a nationally registered listed building. It was constructed and opened in 1912. The building was built by Thomas Jefferson Butler, a highly respected and prominent citizen of Independence. Across the street from the Booth Hotel is the Union Implement and Hardware building. This building was constructed in 1900 to house the Union Implement and Hardware Company building on the first floor, and the Masonic Temple was on the second floor of the building. The business itself opened in 1894 with Thomas J. Booth, who owned the hotel across the street, being the general manager of the business. Right next door is the Masonic Hall building. This building was used by the Masons as well as the Knights of Pythias, who used the second floor of the building. From around 1902 until 1939, it was used as a Masonic Hall and later housed a grocery store, and then much later after that, a theater building. We're walking now past Potts Funeral Home. This building was thought to have been constructed around 1912 and was originally an implementation or implement dealer's building until Potts Funeral Home moved into it in 1917. First Baptist Church was originally organized in 1870 with 17 people who made up the original membership. Today, this very beautiful church building holds more than 17 people and has a much larger congregation. First Presbyterian Church can date its beginning of its congregation back to around 1870. That's when Reverend J.J. Brown, a young Presbyterian minister from the East, arrived, staying in an upper room of a log carriage house here around 6th and Laurel Streets in Independence. Meeting at Daniel Klein's log cabin, the Presbyterian Church was officially organized on April 2nd, 1870. The following day, the first church service was held in the unfinished log schoolhouse, followed by the ordination of 2 elders and the administration of the Lord's Supper to 9 charter members. That evening, Reverend Brown conducted Independence's first marriage ceremony at the same schoolhouse. The Independence Public Library, which was once a Carnegie Library, or still is a Carnegie Library, dates back to around 1907. Actually, the existence of the library dates back to 1882, when the Ladies' Library Association first met and started putting together library programs. In 1905, the Carnegie Corporation awarded the city $22,500 for the construction of this building. I hope you've enjoyed this Wandering Walks of Wonder tour here through downtown Independence, Kansas. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you on our next Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure. Take care now. Bye-bye.